Hello and welcome back to Crouton Cracker Jacks. Today I'm going to show you how to make delicious Chicago-style stuffed pizza. And because Valentine's Day is right around the corner, figured I'd do it in the shape of a heart. Now this pizza is actually a stuffed pizza, which is a little bit different than a deep dish pizza. It's got 2 layers of dough in it, and in between those 2 layers it is stuffed with toppings, Italian sausage, pepperoni, tons of cheesy deliciousness, and it's all topped with a super easy to make marinara sauce, and then all baked to golden deliciousness. Pizza doesn't get any better than this. So without further ado, let me show you how to make it. Now the first thing I'm going to need to do is get my dough ready. I've got 2/3 of a cup of warm water here in a measuring cup, and I'm going to add in 1.5 teaspoons of active dry yeast to this. I'm just going to stir this around, and I'm going to proof my yeast in this to make sure that it is alive and it's going to do its job later on. So once you get this mixed up, go ahead and set it off to the side. And you want to use warm water for this, not hot, just warm water. Now in a large bowl here, I've got 2 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour, also known as plain flour. I'm going to add in 1 teaspoon of salt to that, and I'm going to use my hands to mix this dough from start to finish. So just using my fingers, I'm going to mix that salt into the flour, and then I'm going to add in 1/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil to this. Now I know that seems like a lot. It's not in the grand scheme of things. So again, using my fingers, I'm just going to work the olive oil into the flour and salt mixture. Now this is kind of a different way of making a dough. You're basically mixing this like you would biscuit dough. You're actually going to work in that olive oil into the flour. And the reason you're doing this is to make sure that all of that olive oil gets into the dough. If you try and add that oil later on, you're just going to make yourself a mess. So just work that olive oil into the flour until you have some, nice crumbly bits. It's going to look kind of like gravel or sand, and that's exactly what you want. Now, before you add your water and yeast mixture, you want to make sure that your yeast has proofed and it is alive. Best way to check for that is you will see some bubbles in your yeast and water mixture. You can see here, there's little bubbles around the side and in the middle. That means that your yeast is alive. So you can go ahead and add this to your flour and oil mixture, and be sure and get all the yeast out of the bottom of the measuring cup. And again, using my hands because it is the best tool for the job here, I'm just going to work this into a dough. Now it might take a minute or 2 to get all the flour incorporated into this dough, but don't worry, you shouldn't have to add any more flour or water to this dough. These measurements are pretty spot on. I've never had a problem with this dough being too wet or too dry. So just get in there and mix it together with your hands. Now eventually the dough will come together and all that dough will come off of your fingers. You want to make sure and scrape it off the sides of the bowl as well. And you only need to knead this dough for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, just until everything is incorporated. It shouldn't take any more time than that. You can see here it is not a smooth and elastic dough. You don't need it to be. We're going to actually cover this and put this in the refrigerator to proof and rise overnight. You just want to add some more olive oil to your bowl, coat the dough on all sides so that way it doesn't form a skin. You want to cover this bowl with plastic wrap and let it rise in the refrigerator for preferably overnight, but you can do 6 to 8 hours if you're on a time crunch. So make this in the morning, put it in the fridge, it'll be ready for dinner that night. Next up, we're going to work on the marinara sauce. I've got a small onion here. This is a yellow onion, and I'm just going to chop this into a small chop here. I'm just going to cut that into slices, turn it 90 degrees, cut the slices into a dice or a chop, if you will, just small pieces here. And you want, I ended up using 1/4 of a small onion, about 1/4 of a cup of chopped onion is all you need. I'm also going to add in 2 cloves of garlic. These are rather small cloves of garlic, which is why I'm using 2. If you have some of the big old honkin' elephant garlic, you're only going to need 1 clove of garlic. Go ahead and smash those, peel off the skins, and then you just want to mince up the garlic into small pieces. Again, easiest way, just slice it up into pieces, and then just rock your knife back and forth, and you've got yourself some minced garlic. Go ahead and move that off the side, and now we're going to go over to the stove. So I've got a small saucepan here over medium-high heat, And I'm just going to add in a tablespoon or so of extra virgin olive oil. And once it is nice and hot, I'm going to add in my minced garlic and chopped onions. Now I'm just going to cook the onions and garlic together here because we're not actually, really browning anything here. So there's no chance of your garlic burning. And once your onions turn translucent and you can smell that garlic in the air, you want to add in half of a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes. Only half of the can. If you can find the 15-ounce cans of crushed tomatoes, by all means, go ahead and use one of those. I can never find them, so I just use half of the large can of crushed tomatoes, which is 14 ounces. To that, I'm going to add in half of a teaspoon of salt, as well as 1 teaspoon of dried basil. And I'm just going to stir this together, and you want to cook this over medium heat. You don't want to cook it too high because you're going to drive off all the moisture. Just medium heat for about 10 minutes or so, and you want to cook this covered. Not only so you don't make a mess all over the place, but also so you don't drive all the moisture off. After 10 minutes, you want to go ahead and turn the heat off, lift the lid, and go ahead and give this a stir. And you can see here, it's perfectly cooked. It's not too dry. It's not too wet. This is the perfect consistency here. You can see when you take your spoon and, pull it right through the center of the pan, how the sauce doesn't, cover the pan again. That's the perfect consistency right there. So go ahead and cover that and set it off to the side until we need it later. Now I'm going to cook up my meat. I've got a skillet here over medium-high heat, just a little bit of olive oil again, and I'm going to cook up my Italian sausage. Now, a lot of videos that you watch, including Giordano's, which is what this recipe is based off of, they use raw meat in their pizzas. In restaurant-style ovens, you can get away with that. But in a home oven, we just don't have the right kind of technology or heat source, if you will, to cook that raw meat inside of the pizza. So I like cooking it ahead of time. That also allows me to get all of the extra grease out of the meat. So I'm just going to brown up my Italian sausage here. And here's a little trick for you. This also works with browning any ground meat here. You get this fond, this brown stuff that sticks to the bottom of the pan. That is where all the flavor is in ground meat. So to get that up, just add a couple tablespoons of water to the pan once the meat is finished browning, and that will generate some steam and lift all that fond and deliciousness off of the bottom of your pan. You don't want to leave that behind because that's the best part. So just go ahead and scrape that off, and once everything is scraped off and your pan is pretty much clean, you want to drain this meat completely. You don't want this extra moisture or the grease in your finished pizza. Now this is the pan that I am using for this recipe. It is a 10-inch by 2-inch heart-shaped pan. You don't need a heart-shaped pan. You can do this in a 10-inch round cake pan. That's perfectly fine. But this heart-shaped pan, if you're doing this for Valentine's Day, you can get these at Hobby Lobby or Michael's, Joann's, Amazon, even Walmart carries them. Using a coupon, they're $6 or $7. But that is the pan that I am using, and now I'm going to roll out my dough. Now, after 24 hours, this is what your dough should look like after it has risen in the refrigerator for 24 hours. I'm just going to go ahead and take that out of the bowl, and because this is a stuffed pizza, I'm going to need to reserve some crust or dough for the top of the pizza. So I'm going to take 1/3 of this dough, cut it out of the ball, cover that with plastic wrap, and set it off to the side. Now you'll notice this dough has not risen a ton, and that's because of a few reasons. First, because we refrigerated the dough, which helps develop the flavor, but also because there's no sugar in the dough recipe. But with all that said, we need to roll out this dough. And you want to roll this out with a rolling pin. I'm just going to start here by patting it out with my fingers, and you want to keep this in a general heart shape. The closer to a heart you start with, the closer you will be to a heart shape when you're done rolling this out. So I'm just going to pat this out into a heart shape, and once I kind of get it in a general shape that I want, I'm going to use a rolling pin and make this about 2 inches larger than the pan I'm using. So go ahead and get that all rolled out, and when you think that you're close enough, go ahead and take your pan, lay it on top, and you can see if you will need to roll it out anymore. And before we put this crust into the pan, you want to butter the pan well. I've got a tablespoon or so of softened butter here, and I'm just going to grease this pan well. Be sure to get in all the corners and up the sides because you don't want this pizza to stick to your pan. Then you just want to take your rolled out dough, kind of fold it into quarters so you can easily pick it up and get it into the pan. Just kind of lay it in there and then unfold it. And now is the time that you need to start working this dough into the corners and into the pan. You want to make sure and get all of the air bubbles out from underneath the dough. You do not want air bubbles in here because they will grow up when you bake this and just make a mess of your pizza. So really push that dough into the corners of the pan, and you want to make sure that the edge of your pizza crust is at the top of the edge of the pan here. So just kind of work the dough around, kind of mush it into the corners. It's going to fold over on itself. Just work with it. Eventually you will get there. And after a few minutes of messing with it, this is what it should look like. Again, go ahead and push that crust up until it is at the very top of the edge of the pan, right there near the lip, and then we can start building our pizza. I'm going to start off with my pound of Italian sausage here. I'm just going to dump that in. Now, this is a stuffed pizza, which is different than a deep dish. All stuffed pizzas are deep dish pizzas, but not all deep dishes are stuffed pizzas. So there's actually 2 layers of crust here, and between those 2 layers are your toppings. I started off with Italian sausage, and now I'm going to add a layer of pepperoni. And now is the time you want to add any ingredients that you want to add to your pizza. If you want to add in onions and peppers, mushrooms, black olives, whatever you want to add, now is the time to add it. But I'm just doing the 2 meat, Italian sausage and pepperoni, so I'm going to add a nice layer of pepperoni here, and then we're going to add in our cheese. I've got 12 ounces, which is 1.5 blocks of low moisture mozzarella cheese here. It's block form, and I'm going to grate this directly into the pan on top of the pepperoni. Now, if you want to use pre-shredded cheese, by all means, go ahead. I just find for myself that cheese that I grate myself melts so much better. It's not covered in cellulose to prevent caking, which kind of messes with the meltability of the cheese. So I like using block cheese, and I'm just going to shred this directly into the pan. Now, once you get all your cheese grated, you want to spread the cheese out into an even layer all across your pizza. And you want to make sure that the cheese is not actually covering or touching the outside layer of crust, because when we put this top layer on, you need to seal that to the outer edge of the crust. And if you got cheese there, it's going to prevent that. So go ahead and pull the cheese away from the crust here. And I'm actually going to take my hand here and press this down, compress all these layers of meat and cheese to make sure that I have enough room for the sauce when I add that top layer of crust or top layer of dough onto my pizza here. Now you want to take that 1/3 of reserved dough that you had, that you set off to the side, and you want to roll that out again into the shape of a heart or whatever pan that you're using for this. You don't want to make it any bigger than the pan that you have, just so it fits over the top. So again, just fold that in half. Easiest way to transport it to the pan, lay it there and unfold it. And you want to actually take the edges of this top crust and seal it with the edges of the bottom crust right there at the lip of the pan. You may have to turn the edges over a little bit to kind of make it fit. That's perfectly fine. And you want to run your fingers around here and make sure that you have a really good seal on these where these two crusts or doughs come together. Now, before we add the sauce to the top of this, I'm actually going to tear some vent holes into this top crust. And what this is going to do is allow the steam to escape from inside the pizza. If you do not do this, your pizza will balloon up and you'll have sauce all over the bottom of your oven. You don't want that. So just do a few vent holes here, and then you want to pour your marinara sauce over top. Now don't worry here, your marinara sauce isn't going to, fall down into the holes because we've compacted that layer, so it's all going to stay on top. But you want to make sure that you get all of that marinara sauce out of your pan and into the top of your pizza. And I'm just going to use my spoon here, and I'm going to spread this marinara sauce out to the edges of the dough. Now you want to make sure that you keep it in the confines of the edge of the crust here that we've made, so it doesn't touch the pan or run over the edge of the pan. You just want to make a nice even layer here. And before we put this into the oven, we want to cover this with aluminum foil. You just want to take a piece of aluminum foil and secure it tightly over the top of the pan. And this is going to prevent all the moisture from leaving the pizza. We want to keep that inside, and we want to keep the heat inside the pizza as it bakes. So you definitely need to cover this with something, and you want to bake this in a preheated 450-degree oven for 20 minutes. Now, after 20 minutes is up, you can go ahead and remove the aluminum foil. Preferably you do this while the pizza was still, in the oven. You just slide it off or slide it out. But you want to take about 1/4 cup or so of grated Parmesan cheese, and you want to sprinkle this right over the top of your tomatoes, or your marinara sauce, I should say. And you also want to take some dried oregano and sprinkle that right on top. And then you want to place this back into the oven uncovered and bake it for another 7 to 10 minutes. And when it is done, this is what it will look like. Now don't get anxious. Let it sit here and rest for 10 minutes before you try and take this out of the pan. If you try to do it beforehand, you're gonna break your pizza. So let it rest here for a good 10 minutes. That's gonna allow everything to settle in. And after that 10 minutes, go ahead and loosen up the edges from your pan, and you can go ahead and get it out of the pan, and you want to slice it into slices, and then you can go ahead and serve it up. So there you go. That is how you make a heart-shaped Chicago-style stuffed pizza. This is by far my favoriteest way to make a pizza. If you give this recipe a try, be sure to let me know how you like it in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It helps me out a lot, and I greatly appreciate it. Subscribe for more deliciousness and to keep up to date on all my latest videos. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.